Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and in this one, we're going to be talking about the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters, home of the X-Men. And in this campaign, which by the way, this was the very first adventure we ran at the beginning of January of 2025. Um, and there's so much I want to say about this, but in the past I've done it at the beginning of episodes, and I think people would prefer it if I did it at the end. So we're going to do the story itself first, and then I'm going to tell you how I felt about it and how my feelings were like the polar opposite of the feelings of the players, and we'll get into all that then. But before we do that, smash that like button. Make sure you're still subscribed, and as always, leave us a comment. That helps us out on our end with the YouTube algorithm, but also we love to hear from you guys. We have an awesome community here, and that's thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here. So, having said all that, let's dive into it. The prologue to this one takes place in September of 2024 in Westchester, New York, at the X Mansion. And we did that because we wanted to tell a story about what is basically the first day of college, right? So the first new student to arrive at the Xavier School is a girl named Shauna Romero. And her mutant ability is the animate dead power from DC Heroes. When she arrives, she sees Wolverine and Cyclops arguing about something. Wolverine gets mad, gets on his motorcycle, and leaves. And she can overhear Cyclops say, "Can you believe that guy?" with a girl with red hair who's trying to calm Cyclops down. Romero ignores them and walks in through the front door where she is greeted by Charles Xavier II. He is the grandson of the original Professor X, whose mansion this used to belong to. When the professor died, his grandson inherited it, following in the family tradition. So this new Charles greets Romero and introduces himself. He explains to her where the office is, adding that there is a welcome packet for new students. So Romero thanks him and heads to the office where she meets Storm, a beautiful dark skinned woman with striking blue eyes, cloud white hair, and golden thunderbolt earrings. Storm welcomes her and gives her the packet. Then Romero heads to a huge library where there are refreshments. Next to arrive is Bubble Girl, aka Gabe Buble, who has the ability to create a bubble that is invulnerable to any kinetic damage. She's from California, and she arrives in a self-driving Tesla that her parents paid for. She has jet lag, but she greets Professor Xavier, meets Storm, and then heads to the library. Gabe is disappointed that the refreshment table doesn't have carbonated water, but he makes do with a can of 7 Up. Next to arrive is a young man named Axel, who was arrested in New York City for getting into trouble. The woman assigned to his case is an acquaintance of this new Xavier, and one of the few people in our game world who knows that the Xavier School isn't just an ordinary university. So she brings Axel here and has a word with Charles first before introducing them. And at this point, we pointed out that Xavier has a strange vibe that is almost like that of a grandfather, which is weird because this Xavier is in his 20s and not even old enough to be the father of Axel, let alone his grandfather. Nonetheless, he welcomes Axel into his home and says he hopes the next 4 years will benefit them both. Axel then makes his way to the office, and when he sees Storm, he eyes her up and down And then in a sleazy tone of voice, he says, "Yo, babe, what's good?" And and by the way, this was a brand new player to our game. He moved to our area about 6 months ago and had been looking for a gaming group. So this is sort of his first time seeing how we run games. This is our first time seeing how he plays, so on and so forth. His name's Brad, by the way. So at this point, he makes a charisma roll on two 10-sided dice, and he rolled low. So we said that Storm arcs an eyebrow, and while she says nothing out loud, her body language suggests that she has a rather high opinion of herself, right? Because this is the granddaughter of the original Storm, but she also then is the granddaughter of Black Panther, who is the leader of an entire nation, right? So she's literally, her lineage is like royalty and someone that used to be treated as a goddess, right? So a slight smirk hugs at the corner of her mouth, and she tells him that as a mutant among mere humans, he may be used to getting his way in the past, but in this new environment, he may want to adjust his expectations. Um, which everybody kind of laughed at that. Everybody thought that was like a funny moment. Next to arrive is a young man named Alexander Cooper, who looks almost like a photo negative of a human being. So he has dark turquoise colored skin and white hair, and his teeth are black. The blacks of his eyes are white, the whites of his eyes are black, so on and so forth, right? He's opposite colors. So Xavier greets him, and Alexander makes his way to the library where the others are. And by the way, this might get a little confusing. We didn't plan it this way, but now we have a character named Axel and we have a character named Alex. So it's the same four letters, right? Just slightly different with the two names. Um, at any rate, I can't remember if I said it, but he makes his way to the library where the others are, right? Also here is Blake O'Connell, aka Oobleck. He seems like a bit of a nerd. He also is the others can't tell by looking at him. He was an NPC. They don't know if he's made out of this kind of like white slime or if he's just covered in white slime. But either way, he's here. Then there is Charles Baines, aka Chains. He is wearing a black Slipknot t-shirt, black jeans, black boots with kick plates and spikes. He has long black hair hanging down over his face. He has black fingernail polish. And most noteworthy of all is he has telekinesis that only works on chains. So he has chains wrapped around his body like armor. And then over top of all that, he is wearing a black trench coat. When he gets to where the refreshments are, he just stands in the corner and stares at everybody. Next is Drew Montana, who all the girls thought he was hot. He has kind of dishwater blonde hair, green eyes, and he sort of looks like a male model. And he's wearing a cowboy hat. And so this is one of these moments that I thought was interesting, and we're going to get into this later. So Axel, the one who was in police custody, right? We'll call him Axe for short to try to differentiate him from Alexander, who's the photo negative guy. Um, so Axe immediately pokes at him, right? And he's like, "Where'd you leave your horse?" And so without missing a beat, Drew says in like a real thick Southern accent, "At your mom's house." And Axe says he doesn't have a mom, and Drew just kind of lets it go and heads over to the refreshment table, and he cracks open because they got a bunch of cans of pop, or I guess in other areas people call it soda. I'm from Ohio, so we say pop. But at any rate, he opens up a can of Mountain Dew that's in this cooler full of ice. And this becomes kind of his thing. It's like a running joke for like the rest of the game is and the game after this too, by the way, is it's like all he does is chug this stuff one after another. At any rate, next up is Hector Redford, who has mirror themed abilities. And so that means he has a handful of powers, one of which is the split power. So he can create duplicates of himself, which he refers to as his reflections. And by the way, Hector thinks Bubble Girl is smoking hot. So all three Hectors go over and start hitting on her. And we said that they have a very similar vibe to Chris Kattan from Night at the Roxbury. So Bubble Girl is totally not into these guys. Next up is Hoshi Hime. He is a young Japanese man with slicked back, short black hair. He has kind of reddish brown eyes. He's wearing a well-tailored gray business suit with a gold necktie. He scans the room, sizing up the competition. And his whole thing is he wants to be number one, and he is jealous of anyone who shows any signs of potential. Next is John Kilroy, aka Mr. Roboto, who, despite his name, is not a robot. He's actually a cyborg. And his mutant power is called Body Slide. And it's a bit like he phases out and then he slides to where he wants to be. So it's almost like a limited version of teleportation. Next is Miguel Norton, who we said looked kind of like The Rock, back when The Rock would have been like 20 years old or something. So he has like a darker skin tone. And we find out that his whole deal is he comes from a long line of coal miners. And the company that owned the mines paid just nothing in wages, right? And the company also owned all of the local stores. So it was a really bad situation. And he actually becomes like the standout NPC in this adventure. Like all the other characters are drawn to Miguel, who if I had to sum him up in one word, it would be downtrodden, right? And so as they get to know him, they're talking with this NPC more than any other NPC. And as they get to know him, they found out, well, yeah, they find out through him that there were some diamonds in this mine, right? And so his dad kept some for himself, and then he was turning over some of the others to the company. But the company found out what the dad was doing on the sly, and the dad is no longer with us, right? He is deceased because of this company. And one of the diamonds that the father brought home seemed strange. And so this is the origin story thing, right? So now Miguel can fly, he has super strength, and he can fire a incredibly powerful energy blast that is fusion based. So Miguel wants to avenge his father, but Xavier detected all of this via his telepathy and stuff like that. So he has been encouraging the young man to come here instead of just trying to wipe out everybody at this company. And anyways, so all the other students feel really bad for Miguel and their hearts go out to him. So, like I said, he was sort of the he became the standout character in this adventure as far as the NPCs went. The next students to walk in are the Weaver brothers, and one of them has speak with animals, and the other one has speak with machines. And by the way, we were rolling stuff up at random in the Marvel superheroes role playing game. So, speak with machines in Marvel would in Bloody Heroes, which was kind of the fourth edition of DC Heroes. It's a long story, but the point is they'd call it the interface power. We don't usually use Bloody Hero stuff in our game, but we kind of allow interface as sort of a house rule. So, but that's the idea. The theme of the twins here is one is kind of all nature oriented, and the other one is all technology oriented, right? After them comes Thurman Crocker, who very quickly earned the nickname of Skeezy. He has sonic powers, which pretty much never came up. What he became known for was he was trying to pickpocket the other students. So to put this in kind of a Dungeons and Dragons frame, he is sort of the rogue character. Not rogue as in the chick from X-Men, but I mean the thief, right? Like the party thief or whatever. Um, so he if Miguel was the most loved NPC, Thurman was hands down the most hated. And he had kind of like a goofy, we gave him weird facial hair that's kind of like he was almost like imagine like a teenage version of the Kentucky Fried Chicken mascot, Colonel Sanders. Imagine Colonel Sanders at age, whatever, 16 or 18 or whatever, but with that kind of facial hair going on. Next up is Tyler Dennis, aka Mass. He has density powers, and he is kind of the token gym rat. Like I was trying to kind of do like a breakfast club thing where everybody was sort of from a different walk of life, you know what I mean? So he's short and muscular and he has a shaven head. And of all the characters here, I think um everybody forgot he existed. Put it that way. It wasn't that he was the most hated, right? That was Thurman. Tyler was the most overlooked. Um, and then there is Warren, who was kind of interesting. He looks a little like Wolverine, but his hair is purple, kind of like Psylocke, right? So the other students were wondering if Wolverine and Psylocke were actually his parents. And since they were wondering about it so much, I decided the best thing to do was let it be a mystery. And when he gets here, he literally comes on a plane directly from Japan. So that also kind of fueled some suspicion from the other characters since both Wolverine and Psylocke have spent a ton of time in Japan in the past. And then there's Buffy Taylor, aka Buffer. She is a petite blonde who dyes her hair various colors. And I sort of described her as like a modern day Cyndi Lauper. And her mutant power is that if someone was going to hit you um, with, let's say, 10 APs of Energy Blast, right? She can cut that number in half, so it's only 5 APs. That's it. That's her mutant power. That's not even a power from any existing role playing game, just as GM. I understand how the power works, right? So I just made it up, you know. And I personally, I guess this is something people could argue about, but I feel like the game master has every right to do that sort of thing. Um, at any rate, so Bubble Girl chats with Buffy, and then those two become like instant friends. Next up is a being named Celia. whose name means cytologically engineered life form with integrated adaptability. And she is extremely hard to explain. I actually had Chat GPT help me make this character. The idea is that in a nutshell, I was asking Chat GPT, I'm like, I want to have basically an Android character, kind of like the Vision or Red Tornado or something. I want an android on the team, but how do we justify that, right? Because the X-Men are only mutants. And how could an android be a mutant, right? So the idea is, in a nutshell, is that she is made out of nanoscopic robots. But each nanobot has an organic core. And apparently this is something that they've been doing in real life now, and it is advantageous to do it this way. That scientists have begun experimenting with this stuff in the real world. I actually spent an entire day just talking with Chat GPT, having it sort of teach me this, almost like a college course in a way, right? To help me make the character sheet. And so the takeaways are as follows. As for why she is considered a mutant, she was designed to work on the surface of Mars. So they used mutant DNA when they made the nanobots, so that specifically she could have a healing factor that would help her with things like micrometeor strikes. That even though the tiny meteorites have a small amount of mass, they are traveling at a crazy high velocity. So they could actually hit with the same relative force as a bullet, thus the need for a healing factor. And the fact that she has mutant DNA is what allows her to be here at the Xavier School, even though everybody thinks of her as an android. And in terms of personality, we based her on characters like Data from Star Trek The Next Generation, as well as the main character from an old Robin Williams movie called Bicentennial Man. And her character sheet is incredibly complicated. And I had imagined her as the standout character in this game, using her Plastic Man style powers to help the team. But of everyone here, I mean, no, I guess Tyler, uh, the gym guy, the jock in the group, he was the most ignored. She was the most ignored girl, though, of all the female NPCs. So that really sucked to spend like so much work on this character. And as a GM, you're kind of like fishing in a way for the interest of the players, and I had no nibbles like at all. So that's kind of a bummer to put all that work into it, but um we'll see more of her in future games, and maybe, people will come around to her. The next student we met was Erica Dane, who is the daughter of Lorna Dane, who, for those who don't know, she in turn is the daughter of Magneto, who's arguably the most powerful mutant to ever live, right? So as such, Erica thinks very highly of herself. And the inspiration for her came from an old Lindsay Lohan movie called Mean Girls, where Erica sees herself as the alpha here at the school, sort of the alpha female. Hoshi, by the way, the Japanese guy from earlier, Hoshi Hime, sees himself as the sort of alpha male of the student body. You know what I mean? At any rate, with Erica is Magda Maximoff, aka Miss Fortune, and she is the daughter of Scarlet Witch. And the Scarlet Witch was Magneto's other daughter, next to Lorna Dane. Um, and while Erica takes more after Magneto, Miss Fortune is more of kind of a watered down Scarlet Witch. And she's also a bit of a yes man to Erica and kind of a sidekick of sorts. The next student we meet is Heidi Earhart, also known as Airhead, who we made in GURP Supers a couple years ago. Heidi had a body of air, control winds, create air, vacuum, whirlwind, wind blast, and wind jet. And she is a party girl. So when she meets Drew, the guy in the cowboy hat, the quote unquote hot guy, from earlier, the two of them immediately hit it off. And as soon as this reception is over, they leave together. Next to enter is uh, Catherine Katie Wagner, aka Nightcat 2, who, unlike Airhead, is a good girl. Katie is the granddaughter of the original Nightcrawler and the original Kitty Pryde. She looks like female version of Nightcrawler, and she can run through walls like her grandma. And then there is Snot Girl, one of my daughter's characters, who we mentioned in several previous adventures. She has body of slime. She can shoot quote unquote webbing that is made out of slime, which allows her to web sling around and bind up enemies with her disgusting goop. She meets Romero, the zombie girl from earlier, and the two of them become friends. Last but not least, we have Erica Musterman, aka Noctkind, who's the person pictured in the channel art for this game. She has dark force manipulation powers, and as she walks in, she is holding hands with Trace Pryor, who is a clone of John Redbridge. Trace was created after the original Redbridge died. For more information on him, check out those adventures from 2020, specifically the one with kind of the reign of the Red Bridges that was a almost like a parody of the reign of the Supermen from the Death of Superman story. So at any rate, Axel, who again is kind of our bad boy who showed up in police custody and so on and so forth, he and Noctkind immediately notice each other. And they both have inky black hair, pale skin, and striking purple eyes. And so Noctkin nudges her boyfriend, and Trace sees Axel, and Noctkin seems unsure as to how to proceed. So Trace gives her hand a reassuring squeeze, and then they walk over to Axel and introduce themselves and are being friendly. And Trace offers to shake Axel's hand, and Axe looks at Trace's hand and then refuses to shake it. And I thought this was another really interesting moment, right? The player, the new guy, Brad, he is making these choices deliberately, right? So I thought that was noteworthy. So instead, Axe just starts asking Noctkind where she's from, etc., which annoys Trace. And the two similar looking characters converse for a bit, and Noctkind says she had a brother that she met once who looked almost exactly like Axe. And the more they talk, the more they are convinced they are actually siblings because they have the same powers and same appearance and so on and so forth, right? Anyways, after everyone is in the library, hanging around the refreshment table, mingling and getting to know each other, Professor Xavier enters the room. Professor gives a speech where he talks about the Cuban Missile Crisis and how it was caused by mutants like Sebastian Shaw. He says the original X-Men were on an island at one point, and the United States government decided to nuke them. But Magneto took control of the missiles and turned them back on the humans. He says that was the moment that humanity learned to fear mutants. and that their current plight was due to rage. Xavier tells everyone here that whatever they are doing and wherever they go, at all times, they are an ambassador for mutant kind. And as such, it is of utmost importance that they always look before they leap and think things through. He tells them this school does not exist to weaponize them or to train them to exterminate their enemies. He says this school is here to teach them patience and understanding, and that the war between humans and mutants can only be won through good deeds and kind words. And by the way, again, Axel said he was intentionally not listening. So Xavier tells them there are a great many young mutants who would love to be here, but sadly, the school can only handle a finite number of new students each semester. So he reminds them that being here is a privilege, and there are tons of other needy mutants who would kill to have their spot here. So if anyone's a loner or doesn't plan on committing to their role here, there's the door. He says that being a student at the Xavier School may be the best 4 years of their lives if they allow it to be. Other things are said, but you get the gist. Charles Xavier welcomes the new mutants, and he tells them they can choose their own roommates as well as their own rooms. So Alexander and Toby, I don't remember describing Toby. Did I leave him out? Toby Prosser, his power was um he has animate image from DC Heroes. And so he can take something that's on a poster on the wall and he can pull it out of the poster, right? And we see him do that a little bit later, so I won't get too into it. But so he and Alexander, who was the guy that was like a photo negative, right? Who had kind of the bluish skin and the white hair and black teeth and all that stuff. Um, those two become roommates. Axe chooses Miguel, who was the downtrodden coal miner. Those guys become roommates. Bubble Girl and Buffer become roommates. Snot Girl and Zombie Girl become roommates. So they choose rooms. Bags are unpacked. Some students prefer separate twin beds, while others stack them, making bunk beds. Snot Girl asks for top bunk, and Zombie Girl is quick to say she doesn't want her mucus running down on her in the night, so she shoots that down. Zombie Girl takes top bunk. At any rate, after they all get settled in, they all head down to the danger room, which in the modern day we said could do anything that a holodeck could do. So when they walk in, the simulation that is underway looks like a 1980s shopping mall food court. And sitting here at a table together are Powerhouse and his wife, Earth Angel. They are teachers here now. Powerhouse tells them that he will be teaching them Sentinels 101 first thing tomorrow morning. Buffer says something about how he's going to teach them about the Sentinels, and he just smiles and explains that he's been fighting Sentinels since he was a kid. He also says that he's alumni and that he was a student here from 1994 through 1998. So Axel calls him an old man, which again is right. Axel just keeps starting stuff with like everybody he meets. So Bubble Girl asks Powerhouse what things were like here in the 90s, and Powerhouse tells her he was on a team called Generation X. He mentions Chamber, Husk, Jubilee, Mondo, and Skin. And when he says the name Skin, he says it as though Skin was a troublemaker who annoyed him. The girls wonder if Axel is the troublemaker of their generation, and Bubble Girl asks if they'll get their own team name like Generation X did. Powerhouse says, I don't know. I guess that's up to you guys. He gives them the standard issue blue and yellow X-Men uniforms, and they change in the mall restrooms. They come back out wearing their tights, feeling a bit exposed. Then Nochtkind asks if she and Axel can get some sort of a DNA test to see if they're related. So Powerhouse walks them down to Beast's lab. On the way, Powerhouse is friendly and welcoming. When they meet Beast, Beast is hanging upside down from the ceiling. He drops down doing a flip, and he greets them in a way that is as wordy as possible. Soon enough, Beast tests their DNA, and they learn that they are indeed siblings. So Axel asks what his sister's powers are, and she tells him. She shows him her private dimension, and Axel asks how she opened a portal, so she explains it. And then he does it too, discovering he has his own dark dimension. She also tells him about their father, the Dark Lord, and all the damage that he did, which brings up more memories than she was expecting. Axel has a lot to think about, and he takes in the fact that his father may have been the greatest supervillain who ever lived. Nochtkind, on the other hand, has a lot to think about herself, which brings us to our epilogue. Several of the students head into Westchester where they find a local pizza place and have a good time together. But while they do that, Nochtkind goes to Trace and tells him she has to go away. Maybe for months, maybe for years. But whatever the case may be, she wants to be alone. So she breaks up with him and then opens a portal to her dark dimension and vanishes. Trace is brokenhearted. On the way back to the college, some of the students have a few beers and start to get drunk. Hector, the guy with mirror-themed powers, hits on Airhead, but she blows him off. Poster Boy, aka Toby, says party at my place, and they all go back to the dorm room of him and the guy who's the photo negative guy, Alexander. And Toby uses animate image on a Coors Light poster featuring some scantily clad swimsuit models. So he animates them, and then he also animates a cooler of beers that they had with them on the poster, and he parties all night long, which we thought seemed like an appropriate end to the first day of college for the New Mutants. So that was it. That was the end of episode number 1. And I had hoped we were going to get further. That was really only the first half of what I had intended as the first adventure, right? I wanted them to sleep, and skip ahead to the next day so that we could get into the danger room and fight a sentinel. Didn't happen. That we ended up doing that. We're playing this game on Saturday afternoons right now. So that was then the second Saturdays when we got around to fighting the sentinel. And that second game went really well and everybody was pretty happy with it. The first game, though, I hated it, actually. I hated this game. And I was really shocked because uh Brad and my wife and my son all thought the game went great, and they had really, really positive stuff to say about it. My daughter was the only one who was kind of neutral towards it. Um, she kind of had her mind on other stuff at the time, which is sort of beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. So I'll skip over that. But 3 of the 4 players loved this adventure, and I was shocked that they loved it. And And so, like, how do I want to put this? Okay, so like in the mall scene, I was playing music on my laptop as I was running the game, and I I had made a playlist of music I thought you would hear in an 80s shopping mall. I think I set it in 1989 so that I would have access to every song from the 80s, right? Because obviously, if you set it in 1981, there's a bunch of stuff that hasn't been written yet. You get the idea. I was going for kind of like accuracy there. So at any rate, for the thing at the mall, I was playing 80s music, and I was, when the kids walk in in the food court, this is just where Powerhouse is hanging out. The whole reason for the mall thing was when Powerhouse was a kid, he hung out at the mall and would get in fights with Sentinels, right? So part of this is supposed to be nostalgic for players who have been a part of those games in the past, right? Well, so that's the first level that didn't work for Brad because he's the new guy, right? He doesn't understand this is kind of like an Easter egg for my game world. And I get that. I didn't expect him to react to that part of it, right? But without thinking about it, and like here's the thing I noticed. Brad is 12 years younger than me, and I was 24 when my son was born. So Brad is exactly the halfway point between my age and the age of my son, right? And so this is something I noticed was, and I've never ever had to deal with this before, actually. Um, for the most part, when I have ran the game over the years, everybody's been my age, right? We were all Generation X. So no pun intended, since, we mentioned a team earlier called Generation X. But I mean the players, right? We were all like born in the 70s for the most part. And so we were all nostalgic for the same stuff because we had the same childhood and we had like the same sensibilities. So, like, if one of us thought something was rude, for instance, we all thought it was rude, right? And so like if I hung out at the mall as a kid and I missed it, everybody else hung out at the mall as a kid and they missed it, right? So the thing is though, I don't think Brad ever hung out at the mall. You know what I mean? And so I think for him, the mall was already like by the time he got to the age where he would maybe go someplace without his parents to go hang around or whatever, he didn't have that experience at all. So so even though like I knew that he wouldn't recognize this as a reference to old games, right? I at least thought that an old mall would strike a certain chord with him, and I don't think it did at all, right? And so that's kind of where I'm going with this is I don't feel like I've ever really had to deal with the generation gap before. And and you might say, well, what about your son though, right? Here's the thing though, is like if I was into something like I'm totally at random. Let's take Thundercats. I'm going to use Thundercats and He-Man as my examples here. I liked like He-Man in the 80s, right? And then when my son was born, there was a remake of He-Man. I think they refer to it as the 2000X continuity. So when he was little, those toys were for sale in stores and stuff, right? So like I had the original He-Man toys. He had the toys of this 80s franchise when it was making a comeback in the 2000s. And there was a lot of that going on. So like Thundercats is my other example. Thundercats was around in the 80s. And in 2011, they had a really cool Thundercats TV show on Cartoon Network that my son was really into. And he had every single toy they put out for that cartoon, right? And I think that Chitara might have been like his first crush or whatever, as far as, I think a lot of people, like for me, it'd be like the Linda Carter Wonder Woman. You get the idea, right? But so like there's a lot of common ground there because by the time you get to my son's era, remakes were such a popular thing. You know what I mean? And and so that's my point is like I think that Brad is this age between those two where the remake thing had not really hit yet, you know what I mean? And so it I can already tell that's going to be the biggest challenge of this campaign is just trying to connect with him. That so much of what I do is, for instance, and I didn't really realize it until this game. Like I knew I had nostalgia in the game, but I didn't realize what a massive percentage of the game is nostalgia based. Um, and so for him to have no nostalgia for those things at all, uh, really took the wind out of my sails to the point where when we got together the following Saturday afternoon, which by the way, I record all this stuff in advance, right? So by the time you're listening to this, it's probably about a month after we actually played the game. And at any rate, on that particular day, it was literally 7 below 0 Fahrenheit, right? Like it was an incredibly cold day. And so, like, right there, there's sort of an inclination with our players, anyways, to sort of cancel the game. Like, you don't want to have to walk out in this weather to go to somebody else's house to sit around the living room, eating, Chex Mix and pizza and stuff and playing the game. A lot of cars won't start, so on and so forth. So like that was going on. And so like that morning, the morning of the game, I was debating whether I even wanted to run it or not. And I was like, man, I just felt like that first game sucked. Like I don't know if I want to even mess with this campaign, you know. And we did play the game and we had a good time and I'm glad we did. And as much as I hated the first game, I loved the second game. But the other thing was I talked to Brad and I said, "Hey, I just want to make sure and I don't want to and hopefully Brad is listening to this, first of all. Second of all, hopefully he agrees with everything I say and I'm not misrepresenting anything. I never try to misrepresent anything. If you are listening, Brad, feel free to chime in if you have a correction here or there or whatever. But but at any rate, so we had a talk before the game and I said I want to make sure we're on the same page, right? And I said, so I noticed that last game your character, like he started off in police custody. Um Almost any time people were nice to him, he was like rude to them in return, right? Like refusing to shake the hand of Trace or calling Powerhouse an old man or intentionally not listening to what Professor X said in his speech about the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? Like or making fun of the cowboy, stuff like that. And unfortunately, I can't remember how Brad worded this. So I'm going to word this wrong. This reminds me this reminds me a little bit of like sometimes when you're in therapy or something and you're not saying what really happened, you're saying what you heard. Does that make sense? So what I heard, which mind you, this is not what he said, but what I heard was he basically said he was basing it on himself in real life, which shocked me because he seems nothing but polite in real life, like 100%. So that was confusing for me. But he said that in real life, he basically likes to irritate people on purpose, but not in a way that is irritating. Right? So, like, Again, that's what I heard. That's not what he said. That's what I heard though. So I'm like, what? Like, I didn't get it, you know? And so this was actually another one of these like huge um generation gap things, I think. And not only, I'm not going to compare myself to other people born in the 70s. I'm going to talk about my upbringing real quick to just frame some stuff about like rudeness and stuff like that. It makes its way into our game, right? So it's relevant. Um, but at any rate, so like my town that I'm from, which my kids get on me for mentioning the names of my real name or my real town or whatever. So let's just call my hometown Mayberry because visually it looked a lot like Mayberry from the Andy Griffith Show. But so the thing with Mayberry was like it was a pretty normal small town in like World War II. And then in I guess it'd be the 1960s or whatever, in the Vietnam era, um, a bunch of the young people in town, they were rebelling against their parents and so on and so forth, right? You know what I mean? And the town had very old-fashioned values. Um, so a lot of those young people left and never came back, right? And so by the time you got to the 80s, which were my formative years, my school had such a low number of kids. My graduating class literally had 35 boys and 35 girls, and that was it. And it was because there were so few people in my town in the 80s who were middle-aged, right? Because those people left in the 60s, right? Never came back. We didn't have a lot of middle-aged people. We had a lot of old people, right? Like a lot of age 60 and older in the 80s. And so, therefore, the culture of my town was extremely old fashioned. And even then, I'm going to tell a quick story. There was this famous case where they found the body of a girl, and she was actually the same age as me. It made a lot of news in Ohio back in the 80s. This girl went missing in Cleveland, and they found her um like maybe 5 miles north of the farm where I grew up. Um, they found her remains, I should say, and the guy who did it, they actually found him in the barn of a guy that I knew. Um, and so when that guy found the man who had abducted this girl, he did not tell the cops, and that's where I'm going with this. They He called up the other men in town, and the men dealt with this themselves, right? And so when I'm talking about the culture of this town, the town's thoughts are like sort of this is town business. Nobody else's business. Nobody else needs to know. We are our own little kind of society in a bubble, and we will deal with things as we see fit, right? And they ended that guy. And then when they did notify the authorities, they're like, "Oh yeah, this guy hung himself in the barn." Yeah. And the local authorities were kind of in on it. So when there was very obvious evidence that this guy had gotten really, really beaten up before all of this happened, they were like, "Yep, you're right. That was the cause of why he expired." So the reason I'm telling that story, you're gonna be like, "What on earth are you talking about?" So the reason I'm telling that story is like when I was a kid, like you did not say anything rude to anybody ever, or you got hit, period. And like age didn't matter. If you told a guy who was 60 years old and he was a World War II veteran, if you called him an old man, you were getting knocked out. And there were no adults around that were like, "Oh my God, that's so wrong that an adult hit a kid." They weren't that way, right? They were like, "Well, what did you say? What, what did you do that caused him to have this completely understandable reaction, right?" That's just how I grew up. I remember a guy named Ryan, not the Ryan that I played with, a totally different Ryan. I remember he and I got into an argument. This would have been maybe like fifth or sixth grade or something. And so literally what the teachers did was they said, wait until everybody leaves, because it was at lunchtime in the cafeteria. They're like, wait until everybody leaves, and then you guys have to put all the tables and chairs away. And then once you've done that, we're going to lock you into the cafeteria and you guys just have a fist fight. And then the winner will knock on the door and we'll let you guys out. And we did. We did do that, right? It was a different era, man. I lost, by the way. Ryan was another farm kid and he just had way more strength than me. He knocked me out and he, you know, knocked on the door and they let him go to class. And they sent me to the nurse's office and they're like, "You got it out of your system?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Okay, you can go to class." And that was it. But like so you're like, "What is the point of this?" So it is so alien for me to hear somebody say like, "Yeah, I just insult people." You know what I mean? Like, well, like he said something like I insult people, but not in a way that makes them mad, or like I can't quite remember how he worded it now. And I just remember sitting there like, what? Like, what are you talking about? And then another conversation we had I thought was interesting. This is a little off topic, but hopefully you'll enjoy hearing it. But another conversation we had was he was talking about how he is a dungeon master. He runs Dungeons and Dragons like for his kids and so on and so forth. And he said that he goes easy on that um if he's rolling damage and it's like really high and it's going to kill off a character, he will fudge the dice results. And I kind of mentioned this in a video about a year ago. That was like a hot topic on Twitter there for a hot minute, about whether or not people should fudge dice results. And to be very clear, my attitude on it is the game master can do whatever he wants, right? It's up to you whether you want to play in that game or not, right? But I don't think anybody should tell game master what they should or should not do, really. But I understand that one person's play style is not another person's play style, and so on and so forth. So we were kind of having a discussion about it, and so at no point was I telling them, "Well, you shouldn't do that." I wasn't. I was like, "That's cool. I get what you're saying. Is they're kids, and you want to encourage them to partake in the hobby, right? And if we don't encourage kids to play tabletop role playing games, then 10 years from now, there will not be any tabletop role playing games. You know what I mean? So you need to encouragement is important. So I totally understood where he's coming from. I wasn't even opposed to it. I just I don't know if you want to say I was being devil's advocate or whatever, but I just was saying I was kind of talking about the opposite philosophy. Not sort of saying this is what you should do, but just sort of saying like, well, here's the other way you could look at it though, right? Here's how some people look at it. And I told this story, and I hate to admit it, I can't remember now if it was either boxing or it was a foot race. But somebody I knew is when I was a kid, it was a father-son thing, right? And the point is the dad did not go easy on the kid because eventually in this contest between father and son that they kept doing this over the years, right? Eventually the son won, and he had this huge sense of accomplishment. And so that dad's um uh take on it or whatever, was that's why you don't sort of to bring it back, that's why you don't fudge your dice rolls, is then the when you do succeed, it means something, right? And so I was just sort of like presenting this as like, well, here's how some people look at it. And I don't know if he was surprised, but he looked like really surprised. Again, like I said, like with my therapy thing earlier, there's like what's actually said and there's what people hear, right? Two different things. But so my perception of the moment was he seemed like shocked that I was suggesting like going hard on kids. And so it just hit me that I was like, oh, that totally makes sense that this would be another one of these generational differences, you know what I mean? That he would have been like a little kid and because I think we said he was like 13 in the year 2000 or something like that. And like in the year 2000, I was a business owner. You know what I mean? So there's this big difference there. But I was just like, oh yeah, you were like a little kid in the 90s. And the 90s was, and I'm not saying this about him specifically, but just in terms of that age group in general, that's when everybody was talking about like you get a trophy whether you win or not. And you know what I mean? So me talking about a dad potentially boxing with his son, just knocking this kid out over and over and over again for years until the kid finally wins. I get how that would be sound alien to him. I think what we were saying to each other both sounded alien to the other quite a bit, where we're almost like opposites in a lot of ways. So yeah, going forward, that's going to be the biggest hurdle in this campaign. But so I was kind of talking about it, and I was saying stuff like, for instance, if you're picking at people, and different people are going to react differently. And I think my examples I used were Cyclops and Wolverine. And I said Cyclops, in my mind, is probably going to turn the other cheek. Like he'd be annoyed, but he wouldn't do anything or say anything or whatever, right? Conversely, I was like, Wolverine might pop his claws and try to end you. You know what I mean? Or I think another example I used was again, going back to Dungeons and Dragons, because so many gamers are just so familiar with it. I've been in a lot of games where if someone was like annoying the other characters, the party cleric or whatever who would heal you and get you your hit points back in a fight would just not. Right. Like we knew a guy named Matt. Matt famously ruffled feathers. And so yeah, whoever's job it was to heal Matt often would not because Matt made him mad. And so I kind of mentioned that. And then he was like, okay, like I get where you're coming from now. And he was like, well, I think that my character will hear that his dad was the supervillain and he will see he's kind of headed down that path and he's going to try to not become a villain, and that's going to be the character arc. So, but yeah, I've talked this one to death. That was that game. We had a good time. Well, my players had a good time playing it. I hope you had a good time hearing about it. Uh, as always, smash that like button. Check to see if you're still subscribed and leave us a comment. And from everybody here involved with the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure.